What do you think of, literally, the reaction is going to be in the comments below, what people are going to think of a
I when it's shut comments off.
I'm probably going to have to shut comments off.
and I hope that's not your platform for running for office.
Yeah, no kidding.
You might get negative. You might have literally people coming after you. Yeah, I mean, it's the math all makes sense, right? And I think that, sadly, this is where the government has. I don't think people really understand the caca show that they have created. They have no idea how bad what they created is by leaving the foot on the accelerator as long as they did.
Howdy, welcome back to Dion Talk. Normally, the purpose of my content is to help the average individual learn that you can reach financial freedom in 10 years or less, even if you're not starting from the best position. And in a market like we're seeing today, when inflation is extremely high, and we see things like the Fed saying they're going to raise interest rates to curb inflation, I have an unpopular opinion. So I have my two friends, Michael Zuber from One Rental at a Time and Matt the Lumberjack Landlord here, because I want to ask their opinions. We have a bet going on that by the end of 2022, I expect interest rates to be lower than they are now. I expect them to be around 3.5%. So I'm going to ask you guys first what you think is going to happen with inflation by the end of 2022, because we have a bet going that you think rates are going to go higher. And then what I would like to do is read the script to a video I was going to do, but I think it's a better format to do with the three of us. I have a solution, like the actual solution that would stop inflation in its tracks. And when I shared it with Mike, you actually said a word that we can't say on YouTube. I want to share it with you guys. And I want to see Matt's reaction live when he hears what I think the actual solution to inflation is. So let's start with Mike. Why do you think inflation is going to continue to go up in 2022?
Well, I think inflation has to go up in 2022. I think supply and demand is undefeated. I think supply shocks are still continuing. And what has happened over the last 48 hours probably makes that continue. We will undoubtedly have other variations of what's been going around, and some countries still have zero tolerance and have been known to shut ports down and other things. We have gasoline that still goes into lots of things, and now we've just cut off a third of the world, or whatever the number is. So I unfortunately think inflation has not peaked. I think it goes higher. I think inflation will peak this year, but it will still be very high as we finish the year. That's what I think.
Okay. And Matt?
Yeah, I think it's all the things that Mike said. I think it's also, supply chain issues. And, now that gas is more expensive, guess what all those ships run on? They're not nuclear ships. So, yeah, I think it's a lot is going to have to do with energy. I think that inflation is going to continue to run hot. I think things are going to continue to get more expensive. I think Mike is going to be paying $7 a gallon for gas. I think we'll be paying 4.5 or 5, which is a massive. The only time we ever got anywhere near that was Katrina, like natural disaster. So yeah, I just see the cost of everything getting more expensive, labor and product. And I mean, no one's really talking a lot about lumber, but lumber is almost exactly back where it was. So yeah, I think it's all the supply chain issues. And I think that they're going to have to raise rates to slow things down. So that's where I suspect and expect kind of things to be over the course of this year.
And here's what's great. I know that both of you have been investing for at least twice as long as I have, and your portfolios are multiples the size of mine. So I know that making this bet with you, which we each bet $1, I'm probably going to lose. I'll be the first one to admit Mike is much more educated than I am. Matt is extremely more intelligent than I am. Not that Mike's not smarter than me, but Matt is way smarter than I am. So I'm probably going to lose this bet. And the goal for us is to get information out so that people know that you need to have a plan for both ways. What happens if rates go up? What happens if rates go down? Have a plan. So I'm not the best reader, even though I'm going to be doing the Audible version of this book, reading it. So enjoy that. I'm going to read the script to a video. And this will be a little bit of behind the scenes information where you get to see how I actually script the videos sometimes. You can tell when I don't. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to read this as much as I can. Hopefully nobody falls asleep. And before I give the actual solution to what I think would stop inflation, because normally inflation is caused because we have cheap money. Interest rates are low, so businesses can borrow and grow. So higher interest rates slow down the economy, which slows down inflation. So here's the script to this video. And I literally started this way. Howdy. Welcome back to Dion Talk. I have an unpopular opinion, something you may not want to hear. As an investor, I'm concerned with inflation. Like the Fed, I like to see inflation since it makes debt on my properties easier to pay off. As my assets appreciate since it takes more dollars to buy them, like the Fed, I do not want extremely high inflation. That isn't good for anyone. Inflation is your friend when you own appreciating assets, especially when you're using 30-year fixed rate debt or maybe even 40-year fixed rate debt. I see a lot of content creators talk about how interest rates impact inflation. In the past, raising rates was the Fed's tool to slow down the economy. In the last year, we are seeing really high inflation. The solution in most times would be to raise rates.
But not today.
Here's my unpopular opinion. And at the end of this, I will say something crazy. So crazy, it will never happen. It is not going to happen. 1, interest rates are not in control of inflation this time around. 2, most economists are using historical data and concepts to determine what they think will happen with inflation. Many content creators are associating interest rates with home prices using a direct correlation. I hear this all the time. I heard this on Richard Fain's the other day. A 1% increase to interest rates means a 10% drop in home prices. And we know interest rates don't set home prices. Wages do. This makes sense if the goal was to keep the monthly payment the same. That math makes sense, but that's not what drives prices. Home buyers buy based on payment, and wages impact what they can afford. Area average rents set rents. Tenants don't care about your expenses. They care about what renting something else in the same area would cost them. 3, usually rates help fight inflation because we had cheap money. Low rates let people borrow to grow and pay more for assets. This is almost always true.
But not today.
This time, low rates was only a factor. For the first time, the US had almost true basic income, free money, stimulus, extra unemployment, extended unemployment, forbearance, rent relief. We actually printed money, $120 billion a month for over 18 months, actually increased the amount of money printed to support the economy. 5, people didn't have to work. We all had money to spend, so employers had to bribe people into returning to the workforce. McDonald's paid $50 if you would just show up for an interview. Chick-fil-A raised their starting wage to over $18 an hour in some areas. People aren't paying more for things because rates are low. Companies are charging more because everything costs more, from employee wages to supply chain issues. An example of this is people are flying things into the US instead of bringing them in through the ports. So the results are Feds are going to raise the rates to curb borrowing of cheap money. But prices are continuing to go up because cheap money wasn't the main cause of inflation. It was just a factor. Michael Zuber is right and has the data to back it up. Transactions plummet, but prices will increase. The lending world will be in chaos. Lenders should start working on a side hustle as the number of transactions drops. The higher rates also make it harder for the Fed to repay debt since they don't have fixed rate debt. So what do? My narrative for viewers stays the same. Keep buying great deals. There's no crash coming. So what I want to do is ask you guys now, with that information, that narrative, what do you think the solution, and Mike, you can't because I told you, Matt, what do you think I'm going to say is the solution to end inflation?
I heard it, but I won't answer that way because that would be insane.
It is crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, you're right. It's absolutely crazy. I mean, I think that the only thing that you can do is, watch Paulson turn into Volcker. Paulson ain't that dude. So
Paulson's not that guy.
Yeah, no, he's not that guy. He wants to be invited to every party.
When you're saying that, you're saying, what did that person do? Not just the name, but what was the actual thing that they did?
Oh, they raised rates through the roof.
They raised rates.
They raised.
Specifically, they raised rates, the Fed funds rate
Yes.
above inflation.
Correct.
So investors like when you say Paul Volcker, which I know that's a name I've heard, don't know who it is, don't know what they do.
So Paul Volcker was the guy who came in the 70s and basically said, we have to raise rates above inflation. And that meant raising it to, I think, what was it, Mike, 12?
No, he raised 20.
Up to 16.
Yeah,
right?
It was 20 was the highest. He got it up
20
to
was the highest.
20%. Fed funds rate 20 when inflation was 16. He was points above inflation. So
and that's when the original rate was 8, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it went from 8 to 16. Yeah.
So we went 8 to 16.
Yep.
Yeah, he went from 8 to 16. Then he was at 20.
Yeah.
And so just to correlate that to today's numbers, right?
Yeah.
It's not, it's what is it, Mike? It's like 10, right?
Yeah, let's call inflation 10 just for easy math. That means he would have to take the Fed funds rate, the daily rate to 12, 13.
Yeah.
Which will take the 2-year to 15 and a half.
Yep.
Which will take the 30-year to 19.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
So the really cool thing with this is, as investors, you both went to increased rates to a certain amount would stop inflation. Let's say rates went to 200%. You borrow $1, you owe $2 back that year, like an insane amount.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to stop inflation. Inflation this time around is not because of rates. Inflation is because of supply chain issues and wage inflation. So now let me read what was going to be the end of my video, which would be absolutely crazy. This is so crazy, it's not going to happen. But even the thought is going to trigger people. So trigger warning. If you don't want to be triggered, go to another video. As a reward for sticking around to the end of this video, here's the crazy thing I'm going to say. This thing will never happen, but would impact inflation more than higher interest rates. Increasing rates increases cost to producers for the companies that make things we buy, and ultimately extra costs are passed on to the consumer, usually in the form of higher prices, or in the case of things like potato chips, we get less product for the same amount of money. Remember, this is a crazy statement. I'm aware of how crazy what I'm about to say is, but this is the extreme we would need to go to if we wanted to actually stop inflation. I'm actually doing this so that people can understand how insane something else that we already do is. Higher rates will not bring prices down. It will decrease the number of transactions, but with the things like the 40-year debt, owner-occupied low down payment options, and adjustable rate mortgages, which is a terrible idea, prices are going to continue to go up. Raising prices are due to wage inflation. People having to be bribed to return to work after a year or more of not working, but getting money for free with stimulus, child tax credit, unemployment, extended unemployment, extra unemployment. A lot of people were demanding an increase of minimum wage, and not just 10 to 50%. They wanted it to go from $7.25 to $15, over doubling the basic minimum wage. We didn't raise the minimum wage that high, but the actual minimum wage from supply and demand, not legislation, went above 15. Even fast food places like Chick-fil-A are starting entry-level positions out over $15 an hour, and then quickly announced a price increase. Raising wages impacted employers' costs, so prices increased. Here's the crazy thought, the thing that will trigger a lot of people. We need a maximum wage. Limit how much people can make, and employer costs will not increase, so prices won't need to keep skyrocketing. We have areas that have rent control, the thing that's crazy that we're already doing. Tenants are not allowed to pay a landlord more. If a landlord isn't allowed to charge more for their asset, even while their expenses are increasing, why should a person be allowed to charge more for their asset, their time, while their expenses are increasing? See how ridiculous this sounds? If we limit wages, we slow down inflation. Since the record wage inflation we have seen for 2 years now is causing almost all companies to charge more. Sounds like insanity. Telling companies they are not allowed to pay more for their employees, but we have areas that tell tenants they are not allowed to pay their landlords more. But an employee's costs are going up. Employers need to give raises so the employee can afford to keep showing up for work. Fuel, food, energy all cost more, so wages need to increase. Same for landlords. Taxes are increasing as the property values are appreciating, since taxes are based on the property value. Insurance costs are increasing since replacing houses costs more with wage inflation and supply chain issues. Repair and maintenance costs more, but many people do not have a problem with limiting what a tenant can pay an owner, but can't fathom the idea of limiting what a company can pay an employee. Like I said, crazy, right? It'll never happen. Wage inflation is causing the biggest factor hitting inflation. Our prices adjusted because we had to pay employees more at a CDL school to get them to show up. Transportation companies took their entry-level driver wage from $70,000 a year to $90,000 a year just to get somebody in a truck for a local driving job. That's what's going to continue to make inflation. That's what's going to limit transactions, and it's what's going to scare the feds, in my opinion. That's where I think that the rates will come down in the future. And I get that you guys say timing is the thing. I say 2022, you guys say eventually.
Perhaps, but not today.
Since I had my notes up, I didn't get to see your face. But Matt, what do you think of, literally, the reaction is going to be in the comments below, what people are going to think of a wage cap?
I might want to shut comments off.
I'm probably going to have to shut comments off.
and I hope that's not your platform for running for office.
Yeah, no kidding.
You might get negative. You might have literally people coming after you. Yeah, I mean, it's the math all makes sense, right? And I think that, sadly, this is where the government has. I don't think people really understand the caca shell that they have created. They have no idea how bad what they created is by leaving the foot on the accelerator as long as they did. I agreed with it for a period, and it needed to get us over the hump. But the longer you don't take your medicine, the worse your medicine is, and the longer you have to take it. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for, it's just like anything else, right? It's the third rail of politics that people don't talk about. It's the same exact thing. They're not going to do anything about this. They're going to try and do it using the tools that they have to calm things down. And largely because that didn't really start it, it's going to be interesting to see how far they have to take it to actually get things to reverse trend.
Yeah. They're not only not going to consider this, they're far more likely to come in and say the big greedy corporation. They're far more likely to implement price controls, which is a whole crazy. You think rent control is bad. You start bringing in price controls, and suddenly we're not making anything, right? It's right. If we bring in price controls, that's game over. Done. I mean, price controls have been tried before. Go look it up. We tried to do price controls in the 80s for 30 days. It ended up lasting 26 months. And, development and engineering and investments just stopped. So it's, when you shared it with me, I was like, well, the logic is sound, right? I mean, if you control one of the inputs, wages, and then it's like, oh, that's not going to happen.
It's definitely not going to happen.
No.
But you're right. When we say if we put in price controls, you can only charge so much for your product. Mm-hmm. It's just like rent control. St. Paul put in 3% rent control. And the thing they did different that most places haven't is they allowed it to impact new builds. Exactly. And what do you think happened to everybody who literally was under contract to build? They just pulled out and said, well, we're just not going to make it then.
Yeah. So
we won't produce if we limit the ability to benefit from producing. Yep. Well, thanks for that exercise. I was wondering what your reactions would be. And now the three of us can put up with all the comments that are going to attack me down below.
I won't be looking.
No, expect to see some pictures of some good comments in future videos.
There you go.
All right. Thank you both. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk. Should just leave it recording while we talk for a while just to see what's actually said.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
The thing that will trigger a lot of people. We need a maximum wage. Limit how much people can make, and employer costs will not increase, so prices won't need to keep skyrocketing.